know many people are still signing on, but I want to be respectful of everybody's time and keep this on schedule. MRJ is proud to continue hosting our webinar series. Today is with Sheila Katz, the CEO of the National Council of Jewish Women, speaking on reproductive rights. We are also honored to have this special webinar co-sponsored by WRJ, the Women of Reform Judaism, and the RAC, the Reform Action Center. We thank Shoshana Dweck, WRJ's Vice President of Advocacy, will be running the show behind the scenes and is also representing WRJ tonight. It is my pleasure to start by introducing Shoshana.
Thank you, Rob. It is a pleasure to be here on behalf of WRJ. As he said, I'm Shoshana Dweck, she, her pronouns, and the Advocacy Vice President of Women of Reform Judaism. We're very happy to be co-sponsoring with MRJ and RAC tonight. It's been a busy week for WRJ as we launched our WRJ Says Stop, an initiative against sexual harassment and assault this week with a webinar and a new set of online resources to help bring down the barriers to conversations about and support the work of making our sacred spaces and communal spaces safer, more equitable, and respectful environments where every voice can be heard. 22 years ago, I had an abortion in my 23rd week of pregnancy. We mercifully terminated the twin whose brain had failed to divide properly and thereby saved the other twin. For us, 24 weeks was barely enough time, as we spent weeks chasing down the medical testing and information necessary to save James. Abortion stories are as varied as the people who can become pregnant in this world, and because of mine, I have the Jewish mother's greatest joy of saying my surviving son James is in medical school. Reproductive health, abortion rights and access, and the other fundamental rights that are at stake in this fight are clearly issues that impact all of us. I encourage you to visit the resources available on the WRJ Reproductive Health and Rights page, including our guide, which provides extensive information, action, and advocacy around reproductive health and abortion in a Reform Jewish context. We work closely with the RAC on these materials, and it's my pleasure to pass the baton to Barbara Weinstein from the RAC.
Thank you so much, Shoshana. And it is our pleasure also to co-sponsor with MRJ and WRJ. And I want to thank Stephen and Rob for inviting us to be part of this. And how thrilled I am to be on the Zoom with Sheila, who is a longtime friend and colleague. So this is really a treat. It also feels very appropriate that we're gathered here on the cusp of Rosh Hashanah, which always reminds me of one of the most moving and powerful parts of our liturgy, which teaches us that we have the power to change our destiny, that even as we confess our sins, even as we attest to the wrongdoings we've committed against each other, against ourselves, we have the power to do tshuva and to repair what we've broken. And we also have the power to lessen the judgment against us, the decree from the most powerful judge of all. So then how much greater is our power to change our fate, the fate that some would like to impose on us? How much greater is our power to overturn the decree that 6 Supreme Court justices have sought to impose through the Dobbs decision? And how much greater is our power to change the course of our destiny and ensure that we never go back when it comes to abortion rights? In this case, it's not tshuva that we have to commit to, it is action. And that action has been central to the work at the Religious Action Center, the work of WRJ, all the sponsors and co-sponsors of this program for generations now. The right to abortion access is fundamental to who we are as a reform movement. And as Shoshana said, we have a wealth of resources that supports the action that we can do together to change this decree that these justices have sought to impose on us. And I want to be clear that even if you think abortion is safe in your state, Lindsey Graham, senator from South Carolina, introduced a national abortion ban in the Senate last week, and that makes the right to abortion unsafe anywhere you are in this country. So in addition to the resource that Shoshana shared, I'm going to put another resource in the chat, a couple of them. The first is our blog that we update regularly with tons of action opportunities and other ways that you can get involved. And the second is a link to our Every Voice, Every Vote campaign. It's our nonpartisan election campaign because every issue that we care about, including abortion access, is on the ballot this November. And as we saw in Kansas with the amazing number of calls we turned out around the ballot initiative there, we have the power to change our future together when we act with power, with conviction, and with strength. And so I'm really excited to hear from Sheila this evening and learn the other ways we can act together as a Jewish community and as people that are universally committed to abortion access and abortion rights. So thrilled to be here. Thank you all.
Thank you, Rob, Shoshana, Barbara. All of you who registered, there was a space where it said, do you have any questions for our speaker? And we got a lot of good questions, and we'll try to get to many of them. But a lot of people also asked, why is a men's organization sponsoring a webinar on reproductive rights? And I'll say simply, at the very heart of our tradition is a commandment from Leviticus. You shall not stand idly by the blood of your fellow. If we see our sisters, our brothers in danger, our job is simple. Provide that help, come to their aid, and do what is in our power to protect them. With that, I yield the floor to Sheila Katz, CEO of the National Council of Jewish Women, to whom we owe a great deal of thanks, and I personally am indebted for agreeing to do this webinar. Sheila.
Wonderful. Hi, everyone. It's so good to be here. I'm Sheila Katz. I'm the CEO of National Council of Jewish Women. We're the largest Jewish feminist civil rights organization in this country. And we're also the oldest Jewish women's organization in this country. We've been around for more than 129 years. And for better or for worse, our issues have really remained the same because we're trying to help women, children, and families in the United States and Israel. The landscape certainly looks different today. But on reproductive rights, it's one of the key areas in which it feels like we're going backwards and not forward. And so I'm honored to be here today. First, Shoshana, I just want to thank you for sharing your story as we get started. The more people who are comfortable sharing stories of abortion and experiences with abortion help us normalize abortion in our community. And so I'm grateful to you. And I just also want to name that I'm a proud Reform Jew. And one of the reasons I do the work I do is because of the excellent experience I had with the Reform movement growing up in Nifty, at Kutz Camp, working at Crane Lake Camp. And I consider the Women of Reform Judaism, the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism, and the Men of Reform Judaism all partners of mine and people that I look up to and consider colleagues and friends. So thank you everyone for being here. I also see that there's a lot of National Council of Jewish Women people here. Hello. Let me tell you what I'm going to share, and then we're going to end with Q&A. I've been asked to kind of give an overview. What's happened? What's currently happening? What does it all mean? Who's impacted by this? And where do we go from here? So that could take hours and hours, if not days and days, but I'm going to do my best to condense a decent amount of information into something that people can retain today, and then I'll answer as many questions as we can. But I'll just start by saying it does feel significant that that Rosh Hashanah starts this weekend, and we get to really think about who we've been and who we want to be. And I can say pretty firmly that the country I want us to be and the people I want us to be are people who will always stand up and advocate for those who are vulnerable or lack dignity in this country. And when you take away somebody's access to comprehensive health care, which includes abortion care, you really do take away their dignity. And when women and people who can get pregnant are forced to be pregnant or forced to give birth, you're not free in this country. So we have work to do. So to start about what has happened, we obviously know that Roe v. Wade was overturned by the Supreme Court in June. It reversed 50 years of legal precedent. And it's also worth noting in the context of how this is Jewish, among other things, that it really embraced and enshrined Christian beliefs around when life begins into law. And for those who don't know, before the Dobbs decision, the case they were deciding on, several Supreme Court justices actually prayed with anti-abortion Christian activists right before the decision came down. And so it's not a secret that this was rooted in a Christian belief, and that belief is being forced and placed on all of us. And really, it's been about 100 days since the decision, close to 100 days, and safe and vital abortion care is now virtually inaccessible to millions of people who need it. And even those of you joining today from protected states, it is so much harder to gain abortion care when you have people from half the country trying to get into these locations. It's making longer wait times. It's getting even more complicated to get in. It's a really challenging moment for a medical procedure that's actually quite time sensitive. And I've said this before, but just one person forced to give birth is one person too many. But millions of people, particularly women, are impacted by this decision. And so in real time, we're now watching the rollback of reproductive rights across the United States. And you're here today to hear about how this is really affecting people across our nation and the crucial role the Jewish community can play. And I also want to add, since Stephen brought it up, also the crucial role for men to play. Issues that impact women's bodies and issues that impact our freedom are issues that everybody needs to engage on, not just those most impacted. And I'm proud that the Men of Reform Judaism were the ones who reached out to me first for this, because I think it's so critical that more men are involved on this issue. So thank you for that. Let me share a little bit about some unlearning we have to do before we dive into this, right? So we all have unlearning to do about abortion. Because the narrative around abortion, an incorrect narrative about abortion, has been what has seeped into our country for a very long time, right? So a lot of people, when they think of abortion, think of, this is intentionally in air quotes, irresponsible teenagers, particularly girls, who need most to access abortion, right? As if girls can get pregnant by themselves. But regardless, it's actually, data tells us that it's not teenagers who most commonly need access to abortion. The average person who needs access to abortion in this country is a woman who is married and already has 2 children and can't afford a 3rd child. The number one reason people get an abortion in this country is that they are concerned that if they have another child, they will be unable to take care of the children they already have. This is an economic justice issue. And I'm going to talk about the other factors that go into this, but let me just name a few. And any parent who's on here probably knows this already even better than me. But childcare costs right now are astronomical. We have a baby infant formula shortage. There are so many other things that are going on that make it complicated for people to make a decision to have a child, which is a decision that impacts your body if you're the person making that decision. And it also impacts potentially the well-being of the family that you have. And so, in fact, we know that 6 in 10 people who need abortions and have an abortion are moms. And so I just want to put that framing in, because when we think about this as an economic justice issue, we think about all of the things that we need to work on to make it safer for people to access healthcare, and the difficult decisions families are put in a country that doesn't seem to value families. And so we know this, and you should all know this if you're connected to the reform movement. They say it all the time. People who most likely face barriers to healthcare, clearly in this case, are women, particularly Black people, Indigenous folks, and people of color, as well as LGBTQ individuals, people with disabilities, young people, and those working to make ends meet. And this is an issue, again, that disproportionately targets women. And we also need to remember that not all women can get pregnant. So we don't want to assume that about everybody in the room. And not all people who can get pregnant are women. Trans men are also included in the people who are impacted by these decisions. And so the next thing I want to say is that I think it was a summer ago, maybe 2 summers ago, I was sitting with a group of my friends on a vacation, and they were asking me about my work. I said I thought Roe was going to get overturned. And a few of them said that they they hadn't had an abortion. And it was an interesting moment where I didn't want to place the word on them, but I wanted to expand their horizons around what an abortion is. Because I knew that one of my friends had a DNC procedure for a non-viable fetus, right? So if you want to have a baby and at some point you miscarry and the miscarriage doesn't happen naturally, you usually go to a hospital and you get a DNC procedure to remove the unviable fetus. Most people who have DNC procedures don't walk around saying they've had an abortion, and I'm not saying that you should or need to do that if you don't want to. But medically, a DNC procedure is an abortion. And that means currently in half of this country, if people need that procedure, they cannot get it right away. And not having it in a timely fashion majorly increases the chances of an accidental death for the pregnant person. Other times people need what's medically considered an abortion, but isn't something that people associate with abortions all the time, are when somebody has an ectopic pregnancy. They need to have a medical abortion and they need to have it quickly. And people accessing care for those medical emergencies are also people who are seeking to be pregnant at some point. So abortion and abortion access certainly impacts those people seeking to terminate pregnancies. We know that, and that's really important and needs to be valued, and people should be able to decide if, when, and how to start a family. But some things that people don't always know is it also impacts anybody who wants to be pregnant. And I'll just name, my sister is literally 9 months pregnant. She is due any moment, any day. Like, I could be an aunt by the time this call is over. And I think a lot about what it means that if she lived in a different state, the value of her life would be less than the life of the fetus inside her. And it gives me great comfort that she lives in a state that would prioritize her well-being. And so as I paint a picture of this moment around people who are choosing to have kids or not having kids, which, by the way, is all okay, and we need to do a better job in our wonderful Jewish community of not placing who and how people have families on them all the time. But I alluded to the fact that there are many things that are making family planning difficult right now, right? I mentioned the infant formula crisis that we're having in this country. And it's not just lack of affordable childcare, it's also lack of access to childcare. We do not have comprehensive family leave in this country. In fact, I want to say fun fact, but that's the wrong word, awful statistic, 25% of women who give birth in this country go back to work within 10 days of having that child. 10 days is a birthright trip, not an appropriate amount of time to be caring for and recovering from having a child. We currently have some restricted access to contraceptives, and there's more of that on the horizon. The cost of access to IVF makes family planning around IVF difficult. Obviously, there are genetic diseases that run disproportionately in the Jewish community and in other communities that factor into people's decisions around family planning. And other things in the reproductive justice framework, which would say it's not just only about abortion care, it's also about making sure that if you have a child, that they're able to thrive in this country. You know, we have a gun violence epidemic in this country that disproportionately impacts children. We are still in a global health pandemic. We have a climate crisis. The list goes on. And all of this to say is abortion is one puzzle piece in like a large puzzle on what our care economy looks like and all the different avenues to make change on this issue. And so you already know that in the last 2 years, because of COVID, that it has disproportionately impacted women, particularly women of color. And often you hear about this great resignation, air quotes intentional, of the pandemic, right? A lot of people leaving the workforce, et cetera. Lots of rumors about what that might be. But I like to say that it's not actually a random great resignation. It is the great resignation of moms. It is the great resignation of moms. Women were forced to leave the workforce over the last 2 years in droves to homeschool their children and care for their families, partially because we still don't have equal pay, partially because childcare is as extraordinarily expensive as it is. And in 2 years alone, we have gone back to stats from over 50 years ago of women in the workforce. This is a trend, and it's continuing to trend in a negative direction around women leaving the workforce because economically they can't stay in and afford to have a child. And so we've gone back in time with economic power and with financial security. And again, I'll just say, if somebody wants to be home with children, great. Whoever, regardless of your gender, great. There's no judgment. What we don't want are people being forced because of who they are to be put in these circumstances and not have the same options and accessibility in the workforce. And so obviously we're here as Jewish organizations. This is a Jewish issue. I feel like you all know this already, but it warrants saying this because this is why we do this work, right? And the anti-abortion movement has really tried and successfully to make it seem like religious Americans are against abortion, that religion and abortion don't go together. But as Jews, we not only permit abortion, but we require it when the life of the pregnant person is at stake. And the vast majority of the American Jewish community is in agreement. 83% of Jewish people polled say they believe abortion should be legal in most or all cases. And this is a poll from before the Dobbs decision. And so we can only wonder what it might look like now. So when people might say this could be controversial or it's too political, I hear this a lot in the Jewish community. I'm like, actually, it's not. Most Jews agree on this, and we should be talking about this without whispering it, right? We can actually talk about reproductive care. Within the movements, we know where the reform movement stands, but as we look at all the movements and zoom out to Judaism as a whole, there will be some disagreement about what constitutes a medical emergency for the pregnant person, and it gets more and more limited as we move further kind of right on the denominational spectrum. But every single major denomination of Judaism took out a statement after the Dobbs decision. You've seen all of the amazing statements from the reform movement. And I want to make sure you know that also, the conservative movement, the Reconstructionist movement, and the Orthodox Union all took out statements, with the Orthodox Union saying that this was a violation of religious liberty to ban abortion. And so this is something that all sects of Judaism and denominations of Judaism agree on. And so there are still stigmas around abortion healthcare. Those fighting abortion access have circulated tons of incorrect information about who has abortions and why. And people fighting against abortion have really successfully created this stigma, which is why we have a responsibility to fight these incorrect narratives with a better one, right? With a correct one. How do you fight an incorrect faith narrative with a different faith narrative? How do you fight stigma? By talking about something without shame. And so women's issues often have a lot of stigma attached to them. And there's a lot of work to demonize women seeking power and access. And so we do have to normalize the word abortion. I want to encourage you. This is something everyone can do this week. Say the word abortion in conversation with someone. And if you have like a feeling of, ooh, that felt uncomfortable to say, like sit in that for a little bit. Think about what you've been taught. Why is it that you don't want to say that word? It comes up over and over again, and you can even start to notice who's comfortable saying it and who isn't. But if we can't say it, then the 1 in 4 people who can get pregnant in your community who have had abortions, they are not going to feel seen and heard and valued by you. And so it's a pretty high statistic of people who have had abortions. And we believe that number is probably underreported based on how many medical procedures people don't actually count as an abortion. The other thing that we need to know that's very important that Barb alluded to is that this is actually not the end of the worst case scenario, but the beginning of the worst case scenario. And there's a lot of organizing we need to do. I think the lesson learned in this is that when politicians or judges say they want to take away our rights, we need to believe them. And we have heard in 3 months alone, the following statements from politicians or judges in this country. And I am asking everybody on this call to do me a favor and believe that this is actually the agenda that that group of people want, because we have to believe it in order to actually organize. So we have heard many politicians say in the states that are banning abortion or want to ban abortion, that they plan to have checkpoints at the border of their states to ensure that people who leave pregnant come back pregnant. We have heard as of last week about a national abortion ban. We have heard talk about criminalizing anyone who has had an abortion. And by the way, there is absolutely no medical way to determine if somebody has an abortion or if they naturally miscarry. And who is this already impacting? I know you know this answer. I just can't see you all to like call on you. Black women, the people who have been most impacted by banned states already claiming that they're the ones who have had abortion are women of color, and that is who will disproportionately be targeted by these awful bans and challenges here. We're also seeing people talk about leveraging digital data for punitive purposes, looking to see what you've searched for on your web. Did you search for a Planned Parenthood clinic in another state? Did you look up how to have an abortion, how to take medication abortion? We have heard, again, this full abortion ban, but we're also hearing, and it's different for different pockets, we're hearing no exception for rape, we're hearing no exception for incest, and now, an example in Texas, we're hearing that they want to have no exception for the life of the mother or pregnant person. They actually just sued the White House saying they shouldn't have to make an exception for the life and well-being of the pregnant person. The other things that are going to be impacted by this that have happened in almost every other country that has banned abortion that we're starting to see here and we're starting to hear people say are going to be things that they're working to try to end are contraception, IVF, egg freezing, and I'll just bucket those together for a moment. You would think if people want to ban abortion that they'd be super excited about people getting pregnant. But all of this is not actually about a fetus. It's not actually about abortion. It's not actually about life. It is about controlling women and controlling women's bodies. And that is why contraception, IVF, and egg freezing come up. Most people don't know, but IVF only existed because of Roe v. Wade. And as soon as you classify a fetus as a person, it impacts whether you're able to use fetal tissue. It impacts the classification around eggs and IVF, among other things. And so there will be work, and already is work, to ban that from some people in this country. And it's very important to acknowledge, since this is all a privacy argument, that marriage equality is also on the table here. And that even in the decision, marriage equality came up. And so I'm not saying this to just scare you for no reason. I'm saying this because this is the beginning of the worst case scenario, not the end. And the only way we're going to be able to prevent these things from happening is if we actually treat this as an issue that impacts everyone in this country, an issue that we can talk about out loud without whispering in the quiet over here, and something that has to become a priority, whether we're doing it from an economic justice angle, a racial justice angle, a healthcare angle, a religious liberty angle. There's so many ways to engage on this topic, but we have to be aware of the fact that there is a well-organized, well-funded, small, but loud group of people who are really organizing for change. And the response to what just happened is not going to be something we can do overnight. It is going to take over a decade, if not more, or if not decades, of us constantly fighting for our rights. And so I'm happy you all do a lot around voting. Voting is very important. We're nonpartisan. I know you are all too. So I would just say to vote your values. And with that, I'll give a few examples of some things that are actually happening in states around the country. I mentioned DNC procedures already, but this is a real situation that happens in Texas. A woman who actually had previously had a DNC procedure, so she knew to go to the hospital, went to go get the DNC procedure to remove the fetus that she just miscarried, and she was told she could not have the procedure until she waited. She had to go home, and they said to come back when she could fill a diaper full of blood, and only then would it constitute a medical emergency, and only then could she have that procedure. You know, I can't imagine having a fetus that is dead inside of you and be told, with knowing that your life could be at risk, to go wait until you're bleeding enough. That is not compassionate healthcare. that is not treating someone with dignity. In Ohio, and this case became very widely publicized in the media, there was a 10-year-old girl who was raped and had to travel across state lines for an abortion. And now the doctor who counseled the family about crossing state line faces up to 99 years in prison and potentially will have their license revoked. And the doctor in Indiana who performed the abortion is being harassed and threatened and has not been able to return to work since they performed this abortion. So doctors are impacted by this, and people who want to be given care. In Nebraska, a mother and a daughter swapped Facebook messages about a potential abortion, and Facebook handed those conversations over to the authorities, and now both the mother and daughter are facing criminalization charges. And then obviously there are so many examples of people who want to terminate a pregnancy for so many reasons. NCJW would say any reason to terminate a pregnancy is the right reason if it's what's right to the person who's pregnant. And on average, it's taking them over 300 miles, and now it's going to move to over 500 miles to get an abortion in this country. And for people who can't afford that, that's really complicated and really hard. And there's often waiting periods, and medication abortion requires also some time in between. So you almost need to be able to have a week-long vacation and afford a week-long vacation to go get an abortion in this country. And it's kind of ridiculous because medication abortion is now available. And so I'll just say a while back, a lot of the feminist groups at marches started asking people to kind of get rid of the hanger imagery, right? A lot of time when we think of the pre-Roe days, we think of back alley abortions and coat hangers. And that's very valid for us to think about that because that's what happens. But there is a movement to try to normalize self-managed abortion now, because today technology exists for people to take 2 pills and to be able to have a miscarriage, like to force a miscarriage that's quite safe. Medication abortion is ranked safer than Tylenol. And it's very clear if there's a complication around what to do and where to go, because it's all kind of on the package. And so I will say a lot has changed in 50 years that are good. We should be able to give people these pills. They can do this from home. The majority of abortions today are not a medical procedure that you think of with an abortion. It's people going to a clinic to take a pill. And then they go home and they take the other pill. And so it's important that we understand what resources are out there, because when you begin to understand that, you think it really shouldn't be so hard to make this available to people, because now these resources are here and things have changed. But I would say there's a very important intergenerational conversation for people who have experienced a pre-Roe America, people who have only known a post-Roe America, a Roe America, and now what we're all experiencing. And we're finding a ton of really valuable intergenerational conversations, whether it's grandmothers and mothers and daughters, or just people that you know in your community. And I'll put in the chat, we have some conversation guides you can print out and have with your family or have with your friends to encourage conversations around this. And because of the way the Supreme Court ruling is playing out, the laws are constantly shifting. So I mentioned Indiana, the state's near total abortion ban has taken effect. And then just today, a judge granted a temporary injunction to block the ban, and abortion is again legal in Indiana for now. And so in every single state, we're seeing this legal chaos happening, right? Is it banned? Is it not banned? What happened today? What happens tomorrow? Can I go get an abortion if they're in between the decisions? And so I just want you to imagine for a moment trying to get an abortion, knowing you're pregnant and not wanting to be for any reason. It is exhausting to figure out how to navigate these changing laws. And sometimes it means the place where somebody is trying to go has changed the law. And after all this planning, they find out they can't get an abortion, or they could get it in their hometown. And so it's a lot to really put somebody through as they're trying to figure out in this moment how to get the care they deserve. And so as we're wrapping up and soon moving into questions, I want to share how this is playing out in our communities and some call to action, and then we'll do some questions. So you probably have even more examples of how this is playing out in Jewish communities than I can even provide, because it's happening everywhere. right? In the past couple of months, NCJW has heard from over 300 Jewish organizations with questions. 300, that's a lot, whether it's a synagogue or a local federation or JCC, a lot of questions in harmed states about the legality of crafting new policies to support their employees. Like, can I, if I live in Texas, have a policy saying that I will help you cross state line, right? Legally, the answer is no. And that's complicated because we have a lot of people wanting to live out their values and trying to figure out how to do that in a way that's in line with the law, or whether they're willing to take legal risk. We hear a lot of people talking about protecting members of their teams who have miscarriages, or protecting members of their teams who are pregnant and need to travel for work and aren't sure how to navigate that. The majority of conferences this year for Jewish organizations that were planned before Roe was overturned are happening in states that have banned abortions. And so I just want you to think about several years ago when Zika hit. I remember when a ton of organizations took out statements and whatever else and said, we're having a conference in Florida, but it's okay if you're pregnant and you don't want to come, and it's okay if X, Y, and Z. I've seen none of that so far in the Jewish community. So we have work to do to figure out what it means that we're asking people who could get pregnant or who are pregnant to travel to places in which they wouldn't prioritize their life if there were a medical complication. We're also starting to hear a lot about the challenges of retaining talent in hostile states. And we're already seeing a lot of people contemplating moving and contemplating changing the location of where they are or where their family will be. And the number one question, which I was not expecting, but the number one question we've received from individuals have been women in hostile states who have frozen their eggs, asking whether they need to move their frozen eggs to a different state. And the reality of that question is the answer is not yet. But it very well could be that that's something that we have to do in the future. And I want you to know that we're thinking through those scenarios. And if that should happen, we will help. And so there's a lot to think about here that really is about the dignity of the people in our community who are most impacted and our employees. 80% of Jewish professionals are women of reproductive age. The majority of Jewish professionals identify as women, and the majority of Jewish professionals are of reproductive age. So when you're just thinking about the people who work in our organizations, this impacts them, and it's taking up a lot of brain space for people who are thinking about how to protect themselves and how to get the care they need. So obviously we cannot allow abortion bans to become the new normal, and we can't just sit back and watch and just say, this is too hard. So here are some things that we've seen happen, some things you can do. NCJW launched the Jewish Fund for Abortion Access. I know it's a little unheard of, unless you work at a federation, which they do this often, but this is the first time National Council of Jewish Women is fundraising for another organization. We have raised over $700,000, 100% that has gone to a special fund helping people gain access to abortion who need it through the National Abortion Federation. It helps with travel costs. It helps get over state line. It helps people actually pay for abortions, $700,000 and growing. So if you're looking to try to help people immediately with the care they need, you're welcome to make a donation there. It's meant to feel like a collective gift and a hug from the Jewish community, so it can be known that the Jewish community cares about people seeking abortions. It also provides abortion counseling and somebody who's actually assigned like a caseworker to help somebody from beginning to end, since the laws keep changing and sometimes travel plans have to change. Something you can do locally: build relationships with your local abortion clinics and providers. Have you been there? Have you seen people yelling outside? Sometimes they need some love, and the Jewish community is pretty good about showing love, bringing food, showing encouragement. You can volunteer at a local abortion clinic if that's what they need. Sometimes they don't. And you could show your appreciation at ncjw.org/shop. We have packs of postcards that you could order or print. We have them, we leave them out in our office, and they're little thank an abortion provider postcards that you can send and mail to abortion clinics in your local community. It's something that you could do over lunchtime with your friends. But they hear a lot of people who are angry with them, and we like to say, that it's really holy work for people who are doing that work, and we want to make sure they know that they're loved. I shared that you could say the word abortion out loud. It's one of the most important things you could do. Help reduce the stigma. Abortion is essential health care and should be treated as such. Storytelling. We can tell our own stories. And men, wonderful men on the call, you can also share how abortions have impacted your life positively. Based off the stats, the majority of people who have had abortions have been partnered with men at the time. How has it impacted them? You know, if the person they were with is comfortable with you sharing that story, it's certainly something that we encourage. And then we launched a partnership last week with the Jewish Women's Archive to collect stories from people who have a relationship with abortion, whether it was a family member who had abortion, whether you had an abortion, and we're collecting all those stories and we'll be able to use them in educational ways. So you can go to ncjw.org/stories to learn more or share your story. And obviously there's legislative action. We can pass the EACH Act. Congress can really make a difference on this right away. We could pass the Equal Rights Amendment in this country, guaranteeing that women are equal. We now have enough states that have signed on. It really just needs to be signed. There are so many things that we could be doing every single day. But my hope for you is that you see this as a Jewish issue. You don't stick your head in the sand, but you fight like there's no tomorrow and like our lives depend on it, because they do. And that we figure out collectively and in a unified way how to bring the Jewish community together and the faith community together to advocate for abortion access. This is a war on women. This is a war on families. And we have seen the best of the Jewish community in other examples of war. I know they're different, but we have seen the power of what it looks like when the Jewish community comes together and cares about Jews all over the world experiencing lack of freedoms. And I am saying we are having that in this country right now. I know it's different, but it requires an immediate response and a sense of urgency in the same way. And the thing to give you hope is this is a solvable problem. It's going to take a lot of time and resources, but it is solvable. And you've already taken action by joining us today. So I'm going to stop here and thank you again for being here and turn it back to Stephen for all the questions.
I'm not usually short of words, but I have to catch my breath there.
I know it was a lot, but
Yes,
trying to get as much in.
I want to start by just digressing a tiny little bit, and that's, I know that you were testifying at Congress today. If you could just tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll get back to the topic of, and I'm going to say it, abortion.
Thank you. See, you checked off the assignment already, Stephen. Yeah, I was honored today to join the Poor People's Campaign and diverse faith leaders from around the country, including Rabbi Jonah Pesner from the Religious Action Center, to testify before Congress, naming this moment as a moral emergency in our country and asking them to pass legislation that will help lift people out of poverty. So abortion access was a part of that today, but we talked about what it means that children are living in poverty. And mostly what I'll say, and I posted my remarks on my Facebook page, which is public, but like, you know, poverty is a policy decision. Poverty in this country is a policy decision. And millions of children living in poverty, that's a policy decision. Millions of families living paycheck to paycheck, that's a policy decision. Millions of people who are going to be forced to be pregnant, that's a policy decision. You know, not having access to vote is a policy decision. Not having access to clean, drinkable water is a policy decision. And not having access to affordable childcare is a policy decision. These are things that could change. And we were there together to say, you know, we've been told you can't pass legislation kind of in this lame duck moment, but you just pass something else and you cut out all the childcare stuff again. You cut out children again. And children shouldn't have to be in poverty. Families shouldn't have to suffer. So I thought it was really beautifully moving to come together with so many diverse faith leaders and call this a moral emergency. And I'll just say, Stephen, that as we enter Rosh Hashanah and we're really doing an accounting for ourselves personally, it's also a moment for us to do an accounting of our communities and our country. And right now there's a lot of harm taking place. And what we know about the teshuva process is first you have to name the harm. You have to say, yes, this happened. This isn't good. And then you have to make sure you're not doing it again and perpetuating it, right? If you say, oh, this is bad, and then you do nothing to change your behavior, you haven't done teshuva. You haven't actually done that arc. And so we're kind of tired of politicians saying that they're sending prayers or, after another, whatever the next incident of mass shooting is going to be. What are you doing about it? What are you doing to make the child tax credit permanent? More than 3.5 million children who had been in poverty and then weren't in poverty are now again in poverty as a result of the child tax credit ending. So I think it was important, like we're going to hear the shofar this weekend. It's a wake-up call, and we were there to give members of Congress a wake-up call.
Okay, so speaking of elected officials, this question came from an elected official, and I'm going to read it as it came in, but then I want to give just a quick little background as to what I believe my understanding of it is, and then have you take it from there. And the question that came in is, would you please explain the issue of how signing on to the wrong or risky case can lead to bad law? Now, my kind of understanding of that is, one example is a case that's currently before the Supreme Court that Men of Reform Judaism signed on to, and it's called 303 Creative LLC et al. Versus defendant. And it was is a photography studio that refused to take on an assignment from, in this case, a lesbian couple, because they said it violated their religious beliefs. And second sort of example to this is Yeshiva University, where they have challenged the Pride Alliance, not wanting to give them funding and other benefits as other student organizations, saying that violates their religious beliefs. So is there a point here where we say, we as Reform Jews, this is our religious belief that you're impinging on, interfering with?
Yeah. I mean, this is definitely a religious liberty issue. And I would say this is the greatest violation of religious liberty that we've experienced in this country in the last 50 years, right? This was an intentional decision to classify when life begins according to Christian tradition, and a narrow interpretation of Christian tradition, and force it on all of us. So the first thing I want to say is, I am not saying that everybody should have to have abortions. I'm not saying that everybody should have to agree with what Judaism says. I'm saying that in order to have religious liberty in this country, everybody needs to be able to make their own health-informed decisions with or without their spiritual leader if they have one. And so it's very important, that we're not trying to force our religion on anyone either, but religious liberty exists to protect minority religions. Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, and Jews all do not believe that life begins at conception. There's a variety of understandings around it. And religious liberty is always meant to be a shield to protect and never a sword to discriminate. But what I think the question is getting at, and I'll say I'm like watching these cases with anticipation. I'm excited they exist and I want to watch and learn from them, is there's 2 cases in Florida right now around religious liberty and abortion. And I think the second one, actually, there's a Reform synagogue involved. And so, NCJW hasn't joined either of the cases. We don't usually join lawsuits, but we're talking about this, and we've been a legal hub for a lot of people around the country. And so I'm not saying this about these cases in particular, but I do want to make sure it's known for anybody considering a religious liberty lawsuit. First and foremost, you're welcome to come to NCJW and the legal experts we are partnering with at the ACLU, Columbia Law Center, Center for Reproductive Rights. We're happy to have them look at this and make sure you're not going to cause harm. But legal cases have ripple effects. And there's a few things that have happened in this country in the last several years. One is that a lot of unfair judges have been appointed to these lifetime federal judge appointments. And many of them are anti-abortion, anti-trans activists. You know, a lot like NCJW does court work. We vetted a lot of these people. Most of them were ranked unqualified by the American Bar Association. And so even if you put a good case in front of a bad judge, you have to think about what the outcomes could be. And because the religious liberty argument and marriage equality and LGBTQ rights are so closely connected by the law, sometimes maybe in the act of wanting to stand up for what's right, there could be a ripple effect that harms the LGBTQ community or harms some other privacy issues. So what we've been wanting to say loud and clear, so we're not opposed to people creating lawsuits, that's for sure. But we do want to make sure, given how sensitive this is, given the challenging environment, and given how what one person does in one state could potentially impact, you know, a better case in another state, we want to help people better communicate and better map out the legal risks. Anytime you have a lawsuit, there's a legal risk and there could be bad law. But in this case, because of how close it is to some of these other issues, and because of the judges that are going before or in front of some of these cases, we do have a fear that people with really good intentions could cause harm unintentionally. So we really just want to be helpful. I will say, you know, we will be engaging legally on this matter in time. It's only been a few months. And since cases came up already in Florida, we're kind of watching to see what happens. I think we're all watching to see what happens. And based on what happens there, there's more that we'll be able to say in the near future, and we'll reach out to partners in the reform movement for sure when those cases come. But be aware, if you want to have a lawsuit on this, make sure you're working with a lawyer who focuses on religious liberty so they understand the ripple effects, and make sure you've done your homework around religious liberty laws to ensure you're not going to create any harm or unintended harm for people in the state that you're in.
When we were talking earlier, one of the topics that you actually mentioned was the Israeli response to the Supreme Court, if we can call them that. So would you comment on that, please?
Yeah, I've actually been excited to kind of watch this transpire. Not that I wanted us having a lack of access to reproductive rights to be the reason this has happened, but you know, we're used to watching other countries and being like, oh gosh, really? Like that's what women's rights looks like over there, or that's what those rights look like on wherever it is. Israel saw what was happening here and they said, ooh, that's not so good. I think we need to re-examine our laws on reproductive rights. And so they haven't gotten everywhere they need to yet. For those who don't know, people who seek an abortion in Israel have to go before judges and say that they would like an abortion. And then those judges, mostly men, decide if they can have an abortion. And the answer is almost exclusively always yes, but there is that process. And there's a lot being discussed currently in how to lower the barriers to ensure that people can gain access to abortion, and how they can increase the dignity process as they go through the state, and how they can reaffirm their commitment to reproductive care. And I was with the Prime Minister just the other day alongside Rabbi Rick Jacobs, and we talked actually a bit about women's issues, and we've been really happy with him, with Prime Minister Lapid as an ally on these issues. And we've been happy to see them say, we might be a place where people, Jews, Americans, want to come for reproductive care, among other things. So let's actually make our laws better. And gosh, wouldn't it be great if more people were trying to make their laws better as a result of what we're seeing, which is really horrific experiences for people in this country. So I'm proud that Israel's on that journey.
Okay. We promise to be respectful of everybody's time. So just following up on politicians a little bit. And I know there are questions in the Q&A, and we had hundreds of questions come in through the webinar registration. So I think last question is, how can clergy in particular be helpful and supportive in this post-Roe country?
Yeah, we love clergy. Thank you all. And so many already are. And first and foremost, clergy probably have the answers, around what's best in their community. We want to make sure this is seen as an issue of pastoral care first and foremost. Make sure the people in your community know they can come to you and talk to you, because a lot of these decisions about terminating a pregnancy, sometimes they're really complicated. Sometimes they're rooted in trauma. Sometimes they're really simple, but then you have to navigate people judging you for these things. Make yourself somebody that people can come to. If you don't know anyone in your community who has an abortion, it's not because they haven't had an abortion, it's because they don't feel comfortable talking about it with you. And so again, highlight the stories. We've deemed the Torah, when the Torah portion hits that talks about the portion that like undergirds our understanding of reproductive care in Judaism, we've labeled it Repro Shabbat. And so it's this year, it's the weekend, or 2023, February 17th. And so we're expecting 1,500 communities around the country to participate in Repro Shabbat. That could be the rabbi sharing a Dvar Torah about the Torah portion and teaching about it. It could be inviting somebody to share their abortion story. It could be inviting a local politician to talk about the laws, like depending on what you like to do in your synagogue. It could be a variety of things. It could be a lobby day. It could be a variety of things. Engage in that. And then join National Council of Jewish Women's Rabbis for Repro cohort of over 2,000 clergy around the country who are committing to teaching and preaching about Judaism and abortion. And that's where you can get all the updates on how to engage on local actions, on tech studies, on a variety of different things. You can go to rabbisforrepro.org for that. We have so many reform leaders, including the heads of all the different reform kind of organizations, all a part of it. And we're proud to be your partners in that. And I also just want to give a shout out. Women of Reform Judaism and the Religious Action Center are part of our Jewish Abortion Access Coalition. We have 75 Jewish organizations a part of it. So if anyone here is running a Jewish organization, we invite you to get connected under this umbrella of this coalition, working collaboratively to figure out how we can each make change.
On that note, I want to thank Shoshana, Barbara, of course, you. This has been a wonderful educational hour, and just want to wish all those who celebrate, because I know we have more than just Jewish friends on here, but to everybody, let me wish a happy and healthy New Year.
To a year of justice, a year of organizing, and a better year ahead for families and for women in this country. Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.